Welcome this evening. Welcome to our guests. Thank you guys for all coming to be a part of this. I think we're just going to start out with some opening statements. As Brand explained, you get 2 minutes apiece. I'll pretend to toss a coin and we'll just do it in alphabetical order. Jim, we'll start with you. If you're okay, also, I'm very familiar. If first names are okay with you guys, Jay and Jim, we're all friends here, right? And so if you'll just start with your 2 minute opening, watch the timekeeper. She's very attentive. And if she quit texting, what are you doing?
I'm setting the time.
And then we'll do closing after we just go through a discussion, maybe entertain some audience questions too. Okay?
Yeah, thanks, Senator.
Jim, go ahead.
That. Thank you very much, and thank you to the Coweta Fayette GOP for hosting this event. The insurance commissioner's race doesn't get a lot of attention, as probably Jay could tell you as well as I could. 17% of the people never actually make it all the way down the ballot to vote for insurance commissioner, and we think they're leaving one of the most important offices unanswered when it comes to that. A little bit about my background. I gave my life to the Lord when I was 8 in a revival at Mapleton Church of God. I'm a husband to Lucy and a father to Jimmy Jr., who's stuck in traffic but somewhere trying to get here. He's probably pulled over watching it on Facebook. Like most of you, family matters to me. I had an experience with my grandmother when I was in my early 20s. She was sold a worthless variable annuity policy. And I say worthless because it would not have paid really any money back till she was about 110 years old. There are laws against that, and you know, Granny was devastated. Before we found out about it, about half of her savings had been wiped out. She'd had it for a number of years. So I think I came to appreciate very early on that insurance is a promise. At its core, it's a promise. And in like anything, it's important to be a promise keeper. I love the business. I've lived the American dream. I started a marketing company supporting independent insurance agents, among other companies, and I know what it's like to sign the front of a paycheck. And I look forward to being with you tonight.
Very good. Jay?
Well, thank you, Senator, and thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight, and thank you to the Coweta and Fayette Republican parties. My name is Jay Florence. I'm a Republican candidate for insurance. I'm from Athens, Georgia. Went to a small Christian school in Athens called Prince Avenue, became a believer when I was very young, homeschooled for a couple years, went to University of Georgia undergraduate, South Carolina for law school, and came to the Department of Insurance in 2011 as an enforcement attorney. And one of the things Jim talked about is that insurance is a promise, and I think that's true. And I spent several years at the Department of Insurance as an enforcement attorney, going after insurance agents that violated Georgia law and going after insurance companies that took advantage of Georgia consumers. Worked for a couple of years as Commissioner Hudgens' legislative person, advancing some good legislation, I think, before the Georgia General Assembly, and left and went and served as the Chief of Staff to the President Pro Tem of the Senate for a year, and came back and became Deputy Insurance Commissioner in January of 2017. And soon after Ralph Hudgens announced that he was not running for re-election, I filed my paperwork to run, because I do think, like Jim said, that this is an important office that can make a big difference in people's lives if you elect someone that understands what the office does. And I think from my background that I do. You know, like a lot of people in this room, I'm a lifelong Republican, a lifelong conservative. I've worked hard to get people that I believe in elected. That includes the current insurance commissioner. In 2014, I ran his re-election campaign. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Ralph Hudgens, the current insurance commissioner, somebody who's done the job over the last 7 years and seen me work, thinks that I have what it takes to take his place. So I look forward to talking to y'all tonight and answering any questions that you have.
Very good. Jay, we'll throw the first question to you, as we'll just kind of back and forth with the questions. You both get a chance to answer the same question. If you mention each other in your response, it gives the other guy a chance to kind of have a minute or so to respond to that comment if that happens. But keep it civil. Like we said, we're friends in here. You mentioned you know the office well. I can promise you most of us out here don't. What more can you add? Tell us why the Insurance Commission office is important to Georgians and how that might affect us on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So it's not just the Insurance Commissioner's office. It's also the Safety Fire Commissioner and the Industrial Loan Commissioner. As Insurance Commissioner, you regulate about 2,000 insurance companies or insurance-like companies. You regulate over 100,000 insurance agents. You're also the Safety Fire Commissioner. As Safety Fire Commissioner, you inspect public buildings. You set a lot of the state building codes. You have an arson unit, which investigates arson. As industrial loan commissioner, you also regulate several thousand lending institutions that are not banks and not title ponds. Touches a lot of different areas of people's lives. I think it's called insurance commissioner, and that is the area that I think directly impacts most people's lives the most. But we make sure that insurance companies keep their promise. That insurance policies are a promise. You pay for insurance, and you need to make sure it's there when the time comes. Part of that involves making sure that insurance companies are solvent, that they have enough money to pay claims when the time comes. It also means making sure that they're following all the various consumer protection laws on the books. That's important. We review rates. We don't have as much authority over that process as I would like. That's something I'd like to change. But all of those things touch everyday Georgians' lives, and it's a race, frankly, that more people should pay attention to.
Jim, fill in the blanks on some things there, because you're familiar very much so also with all.
Yeah, he and Jay did a very nice job of explaining the core functions. I think for me, the heart of that office is the fraud division and the consumer services division. There are every division is important, every function is important. Fire safety is certainly important because you inspect nursing homes and prisons and things like that. But for me, I ran the consumer services division for 2 tours of duty at the insurance department, one under Commissioner Oxendine and one under Commissioner Hudgens. And in the time I was there, I think we collected about $36 million for consumers that had been owed to them by insurance companies. If you're at a dispute with your insurance company and you're at a couple $100 apart, your really only recourse is to call the insurance department and fill out a complaint. And so the insurance department traditionally has had the role of sort of advocating if the consumer was in the right. And more insurance companies now literally will stand and not pay 50 cents more than they think they owe. Back in the old days, there was some flexibility because they viewed a customer more long-term than they do now. And of course, profitability has put a lot of pressure on them. So I think for me, it's the fraud unit, cracking down on fraud, and I think it's the consumer services division are really kind of at the heart of serving the consumers.
Well, very good. You bring up the word fraud, so we'll kind of go down that a little bit. Insurance rates continue to climb in Georgia. In the auto insurance industry in particular, I think our auto insurers' exposure is pretty challenging right now. I thought I heard the ratio is about 1.23 loss ratio for auto insurers. You guys might know a little more clearly about that, but that basically says for every dollar in policy they write, they spend $1.23 in claims, and that's not sustainable over time. A lot of that has to do with fraud or frivolous lawsuits. And I don't know about other folks in the room, but my daughter bumped into a guy and broke his tail light, and 2 years later I was sued for $120,000. And I told my insurance company, I said, let's fight, let's take this out. And they said, no, we'll handle it. We're your insurance company. Well, I was thankful they were there, and they did. But they wrote the guy a pretty big check at the end of the day. That drives everybody's cost up. I've got an example here of a $2.7 million jury verdict for a 4-mile-an-hour collision.
Yeah.
I bump into you walking, I'm going to do more damage, right?
Right.
How do you address that? And Jim, we'll start with you on this. What can we do to mitigate fraud within, let's be specific, the auto insurance industry, if we can, from the position as insurance commissioner?
Well, let me say a word or two about rates first, if I could. The problem you have, and I will tell you, for the past 6 years, I've run a property and casualty insurance company. It's what they call the place of last resort. It's the high risk pool for property insurance. And we take a very tough position when it comes to demands if we think we're in the right. And that's the right thing to do, because the problem is if I just write that check to that lawyer, what's going to happen is that's going to get passed along to my policyholders. And so part of the problem is we really don't need the insurance companies writing checks we don't need them making a business decision not to fight for the right thing, because it just costs you money in the long run. It's a little bit like giving your kids cereal for breakfast or cereal for dinner. Yeah, it's a quick meal, but boy, it sure does. They're bouncing off the walls at midnight. I mean, you pay a price for that. And so we have to make sure that we are not bailing companies out by just giving them rate because they're engaged in bad business practices. They've got to be able to run the business. Any business knows you can't price your way to profitability. If Denny's could charge $50 for a plate of eggs every time they started to lose money, people, we can't allow that. We've got to make sure that they're managing the business with the policyholder in mind. So, and fraud is a big part of that. 11-12% of auto policies, they say, nationally is a result of fraud. The TV lawyers are killing us, quite frankly. And we live in a me generation where people take responsibility for nothing they do. They take pictures of their salad and put it on Facebook. So I don't have a big crouton. It's just, like, who cares how big your crouton is? I care about a lot of things, but I've not got up in the morning and said, I wonder how big Mike Crane's crouton was at Lustig. And so from that perspective, we're living in a narcissistic world, and we're paying a price for it from our families all the way to the courthouse with ridiculous jury verdicts.
Jay?
Yeah, so I'll address so one of the major problems that we have is attorney involvement in these claims. You talk about seeing advertisements. I read the other day, it's been a while ago now, but that Georgia, Atlanta in particular, was ranked as the #3 city in the country for lawyer advertising. And like you said, Senator, the more lawyers get involved in these routine claims, the more it drives up the cost, because the premiums that you pay are directly related to the claims that an insurance company pays out. Jim talked a little bit about how insurance companies are likely to cut checks, and maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should do a little more investigation. The way the law reads right now in Georgia, there's these things called the bad faith claims. And what that does is it allows a trial attorney to send a demand letter to an insurance company and say, if you don't pay me, my money in 30 days, then if you lose at trial, you're not only subject to what you're suing me for, the limits are off, and so they could sue you for any amount of money. And trial attorneys have been able to take advantage of that situation and scare insurance companies very often into paying claims that they otherwise shouldn't. And so I think what we need to do, and this is something that you got to work with the General Assembly on, is engage in some real tort reform, specifically to clean up that ambiguity around bad faith that causes insurance companies to be more likely to pay claims that they should not. I think if we could do that, we could make a real difference, among some other things, in addressing the auto rates in this state.
Very good. Jay, we'll stick with you and start on this one. Health insurance costs, everybody's familiar with that since Obamacare was implemented some time ago. The health insurance concept approach, it's higher than many people's mortgage on a monthly basis. And it's just almost foreign to those of us who have got a little gray around the ears. Mm-hmm. And so...
Did you say a little gray?
Jim, I'm trying to be deferential. I'm sorry. Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. But what can we do from this standpoint? So much of this comes down from the federal level. Trump's administration has kind of taken the legs out from under a lot of it, and I think it's Idaho has actually created a state-approved health insurance plan that actually makes a little bit of sense, that gives people some options. What can you do as insurance commissioner? What should we do as Georgians to help get affordable health care back in our state?
So Obamacare has not worked. That's just inherently obvious right now. If you think back to the promise that was made when Obamacare was passed, it was that if you liked your health insurance plan, you could keep your health insurance plan. Well, what happened? In 2013, the year before the law went into full effect in 2014, over 3 million cancellation notices went out around the country. And every year, cancellation notices have continued to roll out, leading to the realization now that if you had an individual health insurance plan that you liked before Obamacare, you do not have access to it now. The promise was made that if you liked your doctor, you could keep your doctor. Well, what happened? I think insurance companies, realizing that one of the only ways they could control cost was by aggressively negotiating with hospitals and doctors, it left a lot of doctors unable to participate in these narrow Obamacare networks. And then you talk about cost. The promise was made that premiums would go down by $2,500 a year for the average family. And I was there again in 2013 before the law went into effect, where we saw rate increases as much as 198% for some people. And it's been a year ago now, but I was talking to a friend of mine that's married and has 3 kids, and does fine, but he's not rich. And he was quoted a premium of over $1,200 a month with a $10,000 deductible, which means he would pay over $20,000 a year before he got a nickel in coverage from an insurance company. And that just doesn't work. But what can we do? I mean, the reality is I thought that things had gotten so bad that even Washington would realize it and would repeal the law. But that didn't happen last year. You pointed out that President Trump is now trying to undermine a lot of the aspects of Obamacare. And I think we have a unique opportunity with President Trump, and that we can apply for a waiver from Obamacare. It's called a 1332 waiver. It's similar to what Idaho did, that would allow you to do things like, take a lot of the mandates that are on Obamacare policies off. And I need to stop. But I think there's some good things the next insurance commissioner can do working with the members of the General Assembly.
Very good. Jim?
I was struck in the earlier question by Jay's answer. It seems like there's a theme. There's too many lawyers in the world. It seems like that was kind of a theme.
Most of them are in the General Assembly.
Thank God we got a few home builders and insurance people there. So I think we need to, first of all, Obamacare was never about providing health insurance for the uninsured. It was a power grab over 20% of the gross domestic product of the United States. It was never about the uninsured. It was no different than when dictators back in the 70s would nationalize oil wells. It was a power grab. That's all it was, purely. And it was, of course, one step towards a single payer, which is ultimately what they wanted. We've got to encourage competition, but we need to think outside the box. I hear a lot of times people say, we need to sell across state lines. That's a great idea. The problem is Blue Cross Tennessee doesn't want to compete with Blue Cross Georgia. So it's more of a concept than it is a reality in most cases. I met with the administrator of the Wayne County Hospital. He said to me, let me sell insurance policies to folks. They're coming to my hospital. They're coming to my doctors. And I said, well, part of my day job, I was negotiating contracts with Lloyd's of London. They'll sell you a reinsurance policy. If you want to go out of your hospital system, you want to go out and sell insurance, they'll sell you a reinsurance policy. Prominent Wellstar tried to do it back in the 90s with Cobb government employees. We've got to think outside the box. There's money to be made there. If Aetna's not buying CVS or CVS not buying Aetna, as a nonprofit venture, and Walmart's not looking to buy Humana as a nonprofit venture. So there's opportunity there, but we've got to shake up the model. We can't just rely on recruiting another traditional insurance company. Concierge doctors, where you pay a flat fee and then you go and you get taken care of. We all have catastrophe policies now, whether we want to admit it or not. My wife and I are on COBRA. We pay $34,000 what we have to collect in the gross income, pay the taxes on it, and then we have our insurance payments of $2,000 a month. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, they're very high cost, and everybody experiences it at some level. Let's talk about, Jim, we'll start with you on this one. What is the overall budget for the commissioner's office? And I would assume it includes, I don't know that they separate. I was served on appropriations, but this didn't fall under my responsibilities. But what's the overall budget and the number of employees that serve under the commissioner? What are opportunities to streamline that, make it more efficient, more effective, better service-oriented to the consumer and customer here in Georgia?
So I think it's about $21 million. Jay would probably know that better than I would, frankly, because I've been gone there for 6 years. I think, is that about right, Jay? About $21 million. I will tell you that you mentioned you're on the Appropriations Committee. One of the things that's been happening there has been they have not been going to the General Assembly to justify their budget. And the reason they've not always been doing that is because they've been able to use money from the Special Fraud Fund for other things. And so what that does is it takes away the discipline that comes from having to ask tough questions. I mean, let's face it, if every time my budget went over, I could just reach over here and grab this pot of money, I'd have the worst household spending in America probably. And so with as much of a pain in the neck as you guys are at the General Assembly, it's actually the way it's supposed to work. We're supposed to come to you and say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and here's what we need to do it. And so consequently, some of that discipline has not happened. It's the closest thing we have to answering to a board of directors. And so the budget is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work to get it fixed because there are a lot of problems there.
Okay, Jay, can you give us some specifics?
Yeah. And since he took a dig at lawyers, I tell you, there are a lot of lawyers in the world. There's also too many insurance company lobbyists, which is what my opponent was for about a dozen years. But on the budget, it's about $21 million. And I do think there's some opportunities for streamlining. Jim talked about consumer services, which is an important division. They get about 12,000 complaints a month or a year, and they only have about a dozen people. I think they're a little bit overworked. We probably need to put some more resources there. But I think we have some good opportunities for privatization. I mean, I think that if you can get private industry involved, and take over a lot of these functions of government sometimes, that they do it more efficiently and save taxpayer monies. And it's specifically on the safety fire side. So we have, for example, we go out and inspect elevators. We have an opportunity, I think, to go to private contractors and allow those private contractors to go out and inspect elevators. I think they can do that a lot more efficiently. We can take some of that money and either return it to the General Assembly or to the general fund, to the taxpayers, or we can use it to strengthen some other areas where we need some work. So that's one specific idea I think we can do with the budget.
Very good. You're familiar with the premium tax. Jay, we'll start with you on this one. I'm not so sure everybody in this room is. Talk about that and what you think about it, and I'll maybe share some of my ideas in a minute.
Yeah. So Georgia has one of the highest premium taxes in the country. We collect, I think it's roughly about $800 million a year. About half of that money goes to local governments, and about half of that money goes directly into the general fund. And that is a tax on you. So every insurance policy that you buy, you pay a premium tax on. I would love to see that rate lowered because it does keep us from getting more insurance companies born and raised here in Georgia. But the reality is it's a lot of money. And so anytime you go to the legislature to talk about taking any of that money away, they by and large have it spent before it comes in. But that's it. Georgia has one of the highest premium tax rates in the country. I'd certainly love to see it lowered if we could find a way to do that.
Okay. Jim, what are your thoughts on the premium tax?
Well, I guess, fundamentally, I don't like a tax of any kind being collected unless it's transparent what it is, right? I mean, just kind of just sort of do the right thing, kind of be transparent about it. Your granny used to say, if you can't do it in the front window, don't do it. Now, I'm going to tell you, her and Granddaddy lived together till they were about 70 years old, and some of the stuff they did, I worry about the window they were in. But I think fundamentally, I understand the importance of it. I would love to see there be some good, clean jobs come here, but I'm a little bit like Jay. I think trying to get anything lowered is just going to be dang near impossible. 1% of it goes to the Fireman's Pension Fund. The police have been trying to get some law enforcement been trying to get some for a while, and their retirement is grossly underfunded. I mean, I've worked for 16 years at the sheriff's office on and off in Haralson County, and the average sheriff's deputy, if they don't have a local program, collects about $800 a month, and so it's a problem. But I think it's going to be very difficult to lower the premium tax.
Yeah. How many of you were aware you pay premium tax on every insurance policy? Okay.
Not many.
Not many. Yeah. And it's a significant number. And you talked about transparency, Jim. Wouldn't it be nice if it actually showed up on the bill? I would like to. I like that. I think the budget's grown so rapidly with the economy, I think we ought to just suggest to the next governor, whoever that may be, that we ought to just eliminate it in Georgia. And because I think that might be, there's plenty of money in the budget to make other decisions.
Well, hey, I'd be all for that.
All for that. You like that idea, Jim?
I do.
All right. Well, we want to hear that trumpeted from the what floor are you guys on over in the? Is it the West Tower? Oh, very good. 7th floor. We want to hear it from the windows, right? Get rid of it. All right. The audience coming up with some questions because this is very interesting. What do you think? Who did I start with last time? Jay, I did. Jim, let's start with you on this one. Well, Jim, we'll start with you on this one. What do you think of the concept within some parts of the country? They are starting to require fire suppression systems in detached residential housing.
I know they love that, but you really do add dramatically to the cost of housing when you do that. I know Sandy Springs recently had a bill that said you couldn't build stick-built houses more than 2 stories, or apartments and townhomes more than, you had to be built out of steel if it was higher than 2 floors. And I really worry. I mean, the American dream is owning your home, and I worry about anything you do that puts pressure on it. I mean, we've got canisters you can put above a sink. I mean, put above a stove that'll go off if there's a grease fire. We've got fire suppression, fire detectors. Certainly, maybe some of the new apartments, it might be interesting to see, but it is a feel-good thing. Now, I'll tell you, because God forbid, someone lose their life in an apartment fire, but I worry about anything that adds the cost to a home, because it's hard enough we have a low interest, but if you're out there working and you're paying what you're paying for gas, it's hard to have enough money for a down payment anyway.
Yeah. Jay, what do you think?
So I agree. I mean, I think we got to be very cognizant of the cost of building new homes. There is currently right now in Georgia law a prohibition on local governments imposing sprinkler requirements for residential homes. So you can put a sprinkler into your home if you want to protect your family from a fire, but there's no legal requirement that you do so. And if you did, if the law was that it required you to do so, then obviously it would increase the cost of building a new home. And not only that, it actually would increase the cost of your homeowner's insurance. You would think that a sprinkler system would, lower the cost of your homeowner's insurance because it would put out a fire. But the reality is that insurance companies are more worried that you will have a leak from the sprinkler system leading to a claim. So if you had a sprinkler in your home, it would actually increase the cost of your homeowner's insurance and increase the cost of your home. If you want to do that, more power to you, but I don't think government should be requiring people to do that.
Very good. Just to be clear, so nobody takes a wrong impression from me, I totally agree with both of you guys on that. I just want to make sure.
You're very wise.
We weren't looking for, well, I'm a home builder, and we don't need to add that cost. Costs are going up fast enough. Speaking of costs, if we can kind of bounce back to auto insurance for a while, Jay, in these accidents that happen, I mean, we see the tally boards out there on the roads, 1,500 deaths, 1,800 deaths a year in Georgia. We just passed the distracted driving. The governor signed it, I think, was it today or yesterday, very recently, and kind of unveiled that down in Statesboro, where we lost five students tragically to somebody that was occupied doing something other than driving. What can we do? Would it make sense, let's just talk about from an exposure standpoint, to raise the minimum limits required for insurance? I mean, the minimum limits are what for auto insurance in Georgia, and what's the average price of a new car? I mean, are we kind of out behind the curve on that? What do you think, Jay?
So going back to the start of your question, I mean, we definitely had a problem with distracted driving, and I think that was a bill that made a lot of sense. We're losing 1,500 people a year on Georgia roads. It is one thing for you to put your own life in jeopardy, but the reality is if you're texting and driving and looking down at your phone, you're putting everybody else on the road's life in jeopardy. We had in Georgia a situation where we had what they call increased frequency, which just means the rate of people getting in accidents per driver was going up very quickly, especially around Atlanta with all of the congestion we had. We talked about the severity when we talked about how expensive it is, when lawyers get involved and all that kind of stuff. But both of those things combined have led to a lot of the rate increases. I don't know that we need to increase the minimum limits until we fix the underlying problems with tort reform. What I talked about a while ago was these bad faith letters. And what that means, the demands. When a trial lawyer will send a demand that you pay the claim and say it's $25,000 now, if you raise the minimum limits, then the insurance companies are going to pay a higher limit. And so you could end up with insurance companies paying even more out. I do think we need to look at the current limits and constantly poll the insurance companies, get data every year from them to see how many of the claims are satisfied with the current minimum limits. But right now, I don't think we necessarily need to increase it.
I've never sold auto insurance, but if I'm not mistaken, the limits are $25, $50, $25. And if you talk to any body shop owner, they'll tell you, if you have much of a wreck, if your airbags deploy, you're $1,000 into it, before. The other problem is the technology on the cars has gotten, I mean, my wife and I were rear-ended by an uninsured motorist. That's a big part of the driver of the cost. But our backup camera on her little Honda Accord was $600. You know, I mean, we have heated, it's not a fancy car, we have heated mirrors. We have heated seats. I tell people back when I was a kid, if you wanted heated seats, you had to eat Chinese food. That's how you got heated seats, you know. I mean, good Lord, you didn't get them by cutting a switch on. You had to go eat an egg roll and a hot and wonton soup or something. But the bottom line is that all these gadgets are expensive, and I do think minimum limits are frankly too low. The only thing worse than you buying an insurance policy and having a wreck is you buying one, having a wreck, and then finding it won't fix your car. You know, that's the only thing worse. And so I think maybe gradually over time, look at that. We've got to do something to stop the rate increase. Rate increases in Georgia have gone up twice as fast as the national average for the past 3 years, and there's a myriad of reasons for that. But we've got to do something to address that first, probably, before we look at putting any more pressure on premiums.
Okay, well, Jim, you mentioned rate increases, so let's talk about that. How does that happen in Georgia, specifically in the auto industry, auto insurance industry? How do rate increases happen? Does the insurance company just get to change their mind and tell you this, or what's the process? Explain it to us, and then talk about how you might have an impact or change that or improve it.
Yeah. Well, in 2008, the legislature passed file and use. And for 2 years, Commissioner Oxendine was the commissioner. And we did not see that system used, as best I can recall. I mean, I don't know that anyone ever walked in and presented to John Oxendine the rates and said, hey, we're going to use these unless you stop us in 30 days. Because they knew that he wasn't going to play that game. I mean, with all due respect to the legislature, you guys have an insurance commissioner to regulate the insurance business. You set policy, and the insurance commissioner sets practice, right? Because there's two parts to the law. There's the law and there's the implementation. So Commissioner Oxendine, but that changed in 2011, I guess it was. I mean, when companies just started bringing them in, dropping the filing on. And the law that was passed says that the commissioner can't stop it unless it's deemed excessive or the market is uncompetitive. Now, what John Oxendine knew was that the law didn't define uncompetitive. The law didn't define excessive, which means it was what he said it was until a trial court said something different. And that gave him a lot of latitude, because excessive to my 74-year-old mother is different than excessive to me. Competitive is different to a person who can go out and has got good credit and can get lots of quotes on their policy, or a person who lives in a cash economy and has no credit and can't get any quotes on their policy. So I still think there was a lot of latitude there. I don't blame the legislature for it. I think it was a decent concept, but I think they probably the right answer to that would be a little more hands-on in looking at the filings and asking companies. You know, these are reasonable people. You pick the phone up and say, hey, how about holding off on this for about 9 months till we look into it, or 6 months? They don't like that, but a lot of times they'll play ball with you if you have those kind of conversations.
Jay, what are you thinking? So maybe clarify a little bit, what was the phraseology used?
File and use.
File and use.
Sure.
Explain that a little more clearly for us laymen out here.
Yeah.
And then how would you?
So in 2008, the General Assembly passed a bill that related to private passenger automobile insurance that said that once an insurance company filed it, the insurance company could immediately go in and implement that rate. And then the Department of Insurance could only go back and roll it back if that rate was deemed to be excessive, inadequate, or unfairly discriminatory. The definition of excessive, as Jim just pointed out, is that if there is competition in the market, then a rate cannot be excessive. I think that's a bad system. Before that, we had a system of prior approval where a rate could not be implemented until the insurance commissioner officially approved it. Since that law changed, we have seen rates go up. I think what we need to do is have a law that simply says that if the commissioner sees that a rate is excessive, then he can roll it back and take away that competition standard, but let it be some sort of actuarial standard so we can roll rates back. I mean, I think the reality is that most Georgia consumers, most people in this state, expect that the insurance commissioner can stop a rate increase if it's not justified. And I think we need to stop or to change the law to make sure that the insurance commissioner has that authority. So that's one of the things I would work on as your next insurance commissioner.
We actually got a few questions from the audience, so if you gentlemen would kindly entertain those. Jay, we'll start with you on this. This, I'll read it as it is. In addition to the insurance, the commissioner oversees warranty products. Currently, legislation only provides guidelines for certain warranty products. If an individual wanted to create a new warranty product, what criteria would you use in approving the warranty? What minimum reserves or bonds, as in home warranty companies, are only required to post a bond of $100,000? So it's kind of in the weeds there, but this is detailed stuff. And
It is pretty in the weeds, and I appreciate you giving me that first. So warranty products, the Department of Insurance does regulate. But the way we do it is very different, and it's based on state law. So state law essentially says that, if these warranty companies, meet a few characteristics, then they are essentially exempt, and our only authority is to make sure that they meet those characteristics. So, for example, they have to be properly bonded or backed by an insurance policy. And if they are, then there's really not a whole lot we can do. And ultimately, if we get a complaint about those warranties, then we end up having to, give it over to what is now the Office of Consumer Protection at the Attorney General's office. That is the way the statute reads. We get a lot of complaints about warranties and warranty companies. I wish we had a little bit more teeth to go and make sure that consumers were protected, but that's the way the law reads right now.
very good. Jim, any other comments on that?
Well, when I was overseeing consumer services, we would get a lot of complaints about it, because people think of a warranty as an insurance policy, whether, it is or not. That's why they think of it. I've just never seen one. My mother, I love her, but she's a sucker for any warranty. I mean, if she goes and buys a frying pan and they say, would you like the extended warranty with that? She says, oh, absolutely. I mean, like the handle's going to come off. Daddy's been dead for years. She ain't had to hit nobody with one for a long time. So I don't know that I don't think they're worth the paper they're written on, quite frankly. Especially, and I get these cards in the mail that says your, car with 100,000 miles is out of warranty. Well, no kidding. It's got 100,000 miles on it, But I'm with Jay. I'm not a big fan of more regulation, but I do think that's one area that we'd be nice to address, because it does lead, and honestly, I think the people that are taking advantage of are folks like my mom. Who just worry about what's going to happen if the frying pan handle falls off, and I've just always thought they preyed on people. That's my opinion. But.
Right. Well, the free market hopefully weeds a lot of that out, but there are vulnerabilities in the market, and we do sometimes look to authority or government to provide some consumer protections at some levels.
That's right.
This question from the floor is, what is diminished value in relation to settling an auto insurance claim, and is it mandatory within the structure of policies?
So the concept of diminished value is, and I think it was Mabry versus State Farm, which was the case that sort of kind of codified, not codified is not the right word, but that made that a reality. There was a fellow that sued and said, look, you fixed my car. Your policy says you'll put me back where I was before the accident. But my car, because it has been damaged, even though it's been repaired, it's worth less, right? Worth less. Because with Carfax now, I can find out. Back in the old days, you'd have to put it up on a rack and see if you could figure out if it's been repaired. So diminished value basically said, in the State Farm case, there was a formula that created a payment for diminished value. The accident I talked about with my wife, we got a check for $198 diminished value after the car was hit. Honestly, we weren't expecting it, but that's what we got, and it probably is worth less because it's been in an accident. But a lot of these folks that are in that business will tell you that the State Farm case didn't really create a formula for it. It created a formula for that case in particular, but that formula shouldn't be applied everywhere. Boy, that's really in the weeds, but I can tell you the concept is your car is not worth what it was before you were hit. That's kind of the base of it.
All right, Jay, is that a requirement within policies or?
Yes, it is, and frankly, it's one of those areas where we get a lot of complaints in the Consumer Services Division. It's one of the commonly argued about things. A consumer gets into an accident, and Jim mentioned he got $198. The consumer may look online and see, no, my car lost a lot more value than that. And that's where the Department of Insurance is oftentimes very good at stepping in and working with insurance companies and the consumers to make sure that the consumer is getting a fair shake. But yeah, it is required. It is a commonly complained about thing. and something where you really got to keep a close eye on the insurance companies to make sure they're doing it right.
Very good. All right, well, we're getting close to wrapping up. I think you've had a couple minutes to figure out a good question to ask your opponent. Jay, we'll start with you. If you'll ask Jim something, and Jim, please respond.
Jim, what is the most important issue that the next insurance commissioner will face?
Consumer protection. That would be my answer.
Okay. You want to
Because-
elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think that you have to have, there are 3 tiers to the insurance business. There's the insurance company, there's the agent, and there's the consumer. It's like a 3-legged stool. And it's really just kind of like a marriage, right? If you won all the time, Miss Crane would leave. If she won all the time, you'd pack your bags.
I'm still here.
I know you win sometime. Now I know you win sometime. Go ahead and get up, sugar. We'll hold him out for a few minutes while you get out of there. But everybody has to be able to win. The companies have to win, the consumer has to win, the agents have to win. The perception seems to be that the consumer's not winning, and I think they need to see somebody as their advocate. That doesn't mean they're going to win all the time. You've got to call the balls and strikes, but they got to see somebody as their advocate. So that to me is the job. I don't worry about, I mean, you got to remember, Mike, I'm the first in my family to go to college. My daddy was a truck driver and a welder. I don't worry about the big man. He can take care of himself. I worry about the little folks. And that's where my heart goes. People like my granny who were cheated, and that's who I'm worried about, quite frankly. Warren Buffett owns Allstate. He's doing pretty good. He can do all right for himself.
Very good. All right, Jim, you have a question for Jay, and then we'll go to our closing statements, and we'll start off with Jay on the closing statements when we get to that.
I want you to know I really struggle with this question. You know, what to ask. You know, it's kind of an interesting question. And I guess the thing to me that reveals the most about a man's character is which Andy Griffin character he likes the most. You can tell a lot about a man if he's an Otis or something. You can tell a lot about
I did
him.
think Otis was pretty funny.
It's a
good
black and
question.
it's a black and white.
Yeah,
it's a black and white show.
I know. But I hadn't seen it in a couple of years. I mean, Andy Griffith would be a cop-out answer, and so I don't want to give you that. So I
you're
guess I'll
better
go
than that, Jay.
Aunt
You're
B?
better than that.
Aunt B?
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Aunt B it
That's a
is
good
then.
answer.
All
Aunt B it
right.
is.
Very
Ladies
good.
and gentlemen, we've settled that
We have settled
right
that.
here and now.
Very good. Jay, why don't you wrap this up for us and with some closing statements, a couple minutes there, and then Jim follow up, and we'll get on with the evening.
Well, you've heard a lot from us tonight, so I don't need to drag it out. But thank you, Senator Crane, for moderating this debate and asking what I think were very thoughtful and informed questions. And I appreciate all of y'all for coming out and hearing us talk. You know, I'm running for insurance commissioner. I'm a Republican on the ballot on May 22nd or before if you early vote, and I would love your vote. I'm an attorney. I've spent my career at the Department of Insurance, for the most part, going after insurance agents that violated Georgia law and companies that took advantage of Georgia citizens. And I think that's what you need in your next insurance commissioner, is somebody who will stand up for Georgia families and Georgia consumers. So I would love it if you go to the polls, if you would vote for me, at least give me some good consideration. If you got any more questions, I'm happy to talk to you tonight. And if I hadn't shaken your hand, please come up and say hello. But thank y'all for coming, and I'd love your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Jim?
If I hadn't shaken your hand, I'm going to be between you and that door, so you'll have to go right by me. Let me say this. As I said in the beginning, insurance is a promise. And what shapes us is our family experiences. And the experience my grandmother had really shaped me in a profound way. I've never liked politicians promising I'm going to do these things, and you know, I'm going to work on this and I'm going to work on that. I always thought to myself, be specific. You know what I mean? So what I want to do day one is I want to double the penalties on insurance companies that defraud seniors and honorably discharge veterans. We need to double the penalties. They need to understand that is a serious, serious problem if you prey on those folks. The other thing we need to do is we need to have rolling regional offices. Back in the old days, we sent people to courthouses to meet with folks. My wife is a breast cancer survivor and went through another bout in January, and her file is huge. And if she has a problem with her insurance, she needs to be able to sit down with somebody and talk about it face to face. The other thing is I've never allowed an organization I led to put me at the top of the chart. because we're all servant leaders. We all work for somebody. And it's important for folks at the department to remember that as well. Lastly, we need rate transparency. You know when you go to your auto mechanic shop and you're handed a bill why you're paying what you pay. I bet you know how much you're paying on insurance, but you probably can't tell me why you're paying it. Your credit may have more to do with your insurance rates than your driving record. We've got to address some of that. I think that's discriminatory against people that pay their debts and pay things off. I haven't had a loan in 25 years. My banker said to me when he co-signed a loan for my son, he said, "Jim, you don't have perfect credit like you thought." I said, "Why?" He said, "You haven't owed anybody money in 25 years. You got to owe money to have perfect credit." Now, if I'd stayed married to my first wife, that wouldn't have been no problem. But me and Lucy, we're pretty tight with the dollar, So anyway, that's kind of what it is to me, Mike. That's what. And thank y'all again. Thank you for being here. There's a lot of places you could be. You could be on a bus to an Indian casino or something. But thank God you're here, with God-fearing people trying to figure out what's going on. Thank you very much.
Very good. Well, let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you both very much. God bless you.